Welcome to the Aboriginal channel. This episode will be part 3 to Aboriginal forts and castles. In the first couple of episodes, I did more showing than I did reading in the old books. This time I'll read and correlate with what we're seeing out here in reality. Previously, I showed Aboriginal forts in Florida, Alabama, and Texas. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on Fort Negley in Tennessee in the Nashville area. This is the remains of the fort right here. As you can see, it has those pointy angles like a star all the way around. You can see the earth is raised like the mounds would be. And this is right here is an ancient, or at least a Aboriginal fort. So right here, we're going to read what it says on Wikipedia about Fort Negley. Fort Negley was a fortification built by Union troops after the capture of Nashville, Tennessee during the American Civil War. Located approximately 2 miles south of the city center, it was the largest inland fort built in the United States during the war. It says the fort was constructed out of 62,500 cubic feet of stone, 18,000 cubic feet of earth, and cost $130,000. Pause. So they know all that information about this fort, but can't produce one slave ship. But moving on, it was largely constructed using the labor of local slaves, including women, newly freed slaves who had flocked to Nashville once it was taken by Union forces, with the understanding that their status as slaves was to be revoked were they to work for the Union, and by free blacks forcibly conscripted for the work. Records show that 2,768 blacks were officially enrolled in its construction. Pause. So they can tell you down to the number of how many people work on this fort, but can't produce a slave ship. Moving on. The fort was named for Union Army Commander General James S. Negley. It goes on to say when the Battle of Nashville finally began in December 1864, it was largely fought on the heights, even further south of the city than Fort Negley, which despite its then impressive appearance, never played a leading military role. Shortly after the war, the fort was abandoned and fell into ruin. However, its outline could be readily discerned for many years afterwards in the encroaching woods. During the Reconstruction period, the area was used as a meeting place for the Ku Klux Klan, as confirmed by former Klansman Marcus B. Toney. Now, who is Marcus B. Toney? It says Marcus B. Toney was an American Confederate veteran, Klansman, and Masonic leader who worked for the Tennessee Central Railroad. During the American Civil War of 1861 through 1865, Toney served in the Confederate States Army under General Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. He was captured and sent to Elmira prison. After the war, Toney joined the Ku Klux Klan under the leadership of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Who is Nathan Bedford Forrest? Nathan Bedford Forrest was a Confederate Army general during the American Civil War. Although scholars generally respect Forrest as a military strategist, see, they respect him as a military strategist, he has remained a controversial figure in Southern racial history, especially for his role in the massacre of black soldiers at Fort Pillow. So we're going to go right here in the book, The Antiquities of Tennessee and the Adjacent States and the State of Aboriginal Society and the Scale of Civilization Represented by Them, by Gates P. Thurston, 1897. And in this book, basically, I'm going to show you where Indians had built a castle right there in Nashville, Tennessee. It says that tradition tells us they had come from the far Shawnee or Shawnee River of Florida and from the Savannah in Georgia. An ancient Shawnee village and stockade fort was built upon the present site of Nashville. Goes on to say that they were never at peace. No wonder their ancient homes upon the Cumberland were fortified like the walled towns of feudal Europe. Each settlement probably had its castle of security. Now, it goes on to say, and I think it's important to point this out since we will be looking at different fortified structures in these areas, that in a carefully prepared paper maintains that the ancestors of Chattahoochee Muskogee tribes were probably the original mound building stock or family. These tribes embraced the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Natchez, and other allied southern Indians within the historic period. As we learn from early writers, they were builders of earthworks and mound defenses. So in this episode, we just learned that Fort Negley has an Aboriginal structure on it. also in this book, it says that their traditions date back to a period before the advent of the first Spaniards. They also appear to indicate a knowledge of the Pueblos of New Mexico as early as the year 1730, when Duprat resided among them, and before information as to the Pueblo districts was generally distributed, as they gave accounts to Duprat of a people to the west or southwest who had a great number of large and small villages, which were all built of stone, and in which there were houses large enough to lodge a whole tribe. So right here it's saying that the people in the west and southwest had small villages which were all built of stone. So when we look in, say, New Mexico, this is an ancient city right here, built of stone. And I'm pointing this out because the book said that the tribes over in the south, southeast, and northeast area throughout the Mississippi Valley were more advanced than the tribes over in Mexico and Arizona. So if the tribes in Mexico and Arizona were building things like this, one must conclude that the more advanced tribes in the other areas of the Western Hemisphere were creating and building things more advanced than this one right here. Now, also in the book, this is important to point out, it says that when it says the Shawnees were never at peace, it says that the Iroquois were pressing them from the north with unrelenting hate. The Chickasaws and Choctaws preyed upon them from the south, the Cherokees from the southeast. The Shawnees were finally overwhelmed and scattered. They fled beyond the Ohio. Their towns and villages were desolated and left in ashes, and they were compelled to pay tribute to that powerful confederacy of warriors, the Six Nations. Now, the Six Nations were the Iroquois up in the New York area right around 1720 is when basically they were the Five Nations, and then the Tuscarora came up and added them, and they became the Six Nations right around 1722. And I pointed that out because there will be forts and castles that we find up there in the New York area, as well as down south, basically all over the place. And I'm not saying that the Shawnees went up to New York and built the same structures, but they could have. But I would say that those structures having those diamond shapes at the end of those angles is a basic structure in North and Southeast and Midwest United States, because we seen the Tuscaroras in the early 1700s build a structure with those diamond shapes that look like the rest of the ones that we've found so far. So who's to say how it went, but we're figuring this out right here. Right here it says that they had castles and that the ancient homes upon the Cumberland were fortified like the walled towns of feudal Europe. On a side note, I just found this right here. It says the secret pyramid in North Dakota you probably never heard of. It says the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. has published the photos of the construction of a military missile base with a pyramidal form, and some believe that its capabilities go far beyond its original purpose, defend against Soviet aggression. The Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. has published photos and drawings of a military complex built in the state of North Dakota in 1975. In the photos, taken by photographer Benjamin Halpern for the U.S. government, the various stages of building appear to be very similar to the Mexican pyramid of Kukulkan in the archaeological complex of Chichen Itza. On a side note, those two places are named after the mythological gods of the culture there. Kukulkan and Itza are two of the mythological gods. But it goes on to say that the purpose of this radar pyramid was to detect and intercept ballistic missiles launched by the Soviet Union that could threaten the United States. Pause. This is some lying bullshit. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then what's the truth?